Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 61. This session is focusing on contextualizing, giving an understanding, giving an introduction to the subject of alchemy. The philosophy of the Spiritual Studies course is married to the history of ideas, the history of thought, and comparative religion. Alchemy is a strange topic in the way that it weaves between spiritual traditions. It is an anomalous entry upon the list of what could be considered a spiritual tradition. However, we can't talk about certain secret societies, about certain subjects and leads without it inevitably tying back into alchemy. So what is that word as an opener to the subject? Alchemy, alchemia, which is chemia, which is al, meaning the, chemia, which is the black magic. Now, don't let that get too dramatic now, because cheme, or kim, is Egyptian for the black earth, the fertile soil that would wash up from the flooding of the Nile, that would give life to all the agriculture that would grow, and subsequently all the life to the people that benefit from said agriculture. The black is the blackness of the soil. So saying black magic has obviously been quite misunderstood, as the meaning of that idiosyncratic nomenclature has changed through time. This is understood as an ancient art that seeks purification of the soul, immortality in a certain misunderstanding of the word, transmutation of chemical elements, where gold is an allegory for perfection. This, of course, as many would know, exoterically be understood that alchemists were purely interested in gold, literally gold, like the Spanish inquisitors, conquering, colonizing areas to seek gold, riches. Worthy of stating once more, and as the subject goes forward, gold symbolizes perfection to the Western world and extending outward. So alchemists have been accredited in the early, with the early creation of chemistry. However, we cannot mention this subject without also having to mention how it made pharmaceuticals, medicines, and how this was equally a basis for alchemy. Also, metallurgy, of course, undermentioned, but chemistry, chemie, as it would derive into, is obviously the most obvious of them. All of this is saying something about understanding the materiality of the world, which is where we can get into where things turn real soupy, trippy, spiritual, because what is the material world will become our leading question. So this act of turning lead into gold symbolizes this spiritual transformation or transmutation from taking one thing and making it other. A great allegory for this is that you have a lump of coal and you have a diamond. Chemically, they are the same. Or I should say, its components are the same. So what's the difference? The difference is what has been applied to, what has been made out of the same material, carbon. So in this way, you as a person, and this is the mind that we need to start entering, you as a person want to mature, want to improve, want to lessen the suffering of this world unto yourself. How can you make the coal that is you into a diamond? the inner transformation of what you could do to speed up the recipe of your creation. So this concern was rooted in the spiritual, and all the physical things were a representation of this spiritual transformation. To pull off one of the great works was viewed as an affirmation of your ascension. Say you've been working at trying to create a particular recipe, a particular make of something. You get the intuition, you get the leads, you focus and focus and focus, you go through all of this work. Alchemists were also obsessed with the right time and the right place. You needed seasons, thus the tie-in with astrology. So you needed the right time to get the right weather, to get the right substances. You had to know the right time. And also, you would have to be consistent. You would have to show up. You'd have to go through the operations, the processes. And you've tried for years and years and years to get this particular substance that you're working towards, and you finally do. You see it. What a grateful thing it would be to literally see, to have something tangible that would represent your own internal improvement. The universe, God, what have you, reciprocating you, giving you this sign. Beautiful. Not so often when we have transcendent experiences within ourselves that we have something so tangible to point to. Anyhow, this inspired a vision to become perfect, to wave off all manner of limitations, diseases, mentally, physically, spiritually, and this fundamental idea that is at the root of religion, that is that we are impure. If you go to the Gnosticism talk, you'll find that this was all about how to achieve Gnosis. How to achieve Gnosis was how to supersede the prison, the impurity of the material existence, which this, in truth, is not far from Christianity as well. We have sinned. How, if ever, can we escape from this body of sin? And likewise with samsara, likewise with, the grievous cycle. This idea of how to escape plays perfectly into what the alchemists aspire to do. Not to all of them, but to the great majority, I should say. How can I make myself pure? You are the thing to make pure. How to do this is a whole nother discussion. How to become one with the divine mind, how to achieve perfection, beauty, and harmony. And I want to point this out before I forget. These ideas of this kind of deus ex machina, this miraculous substance that could give a person a kind of supernatural power or ability, right? Like, it's no wonder that Columbus and these conquistadors were looking for, say, the Fountain of Youth. When you have mythic stories like Excalibur, when you have mythic substances like mana or the Ark of the Covenant, if you were this spiritual and taking these stories so literally, then it's not a hard bet to see why people were looking for these things. And also the question is, what can we do with this matter? What is matter? And the question there is an ontological question. What is stuff made of? What can it do? What are we? What is this? And this other more very human thing where it's like, what can we take and can we improve it? Right? Can we do it better, or can we make it serve our own purposes? If you take grapes, right, then you can make it into wine. If you take the stalks from the fields, you can make it into bread. Our very existence is all about transmutation. We transmute everything. I'm speaking through a microphone. How many things needed to be transmuted to make this act possible? To create a knife is an act of transmutation. To sharpen it, to procure it, to give it a wield. All of these things are transmuting, augmenting materials into a particular make. So the question is, how far can we do this? It's also an epistemological question. What would we have to do to know? Which is a great experiment. A great experiment. So where can we trace this story? And of course, it goes back to our reference of the black soil, back to Egypt. And of course, the name comes up. Hermes Trismegistus, thought to be the progenitor of alchemy, which is a shifty claim, but is a good starting point. This alleged person figure, which we've talked about this, before in the course, was around 2000 BC, 1900 BC. Created many written works on papyri, many of which were destroyed by Emperor Diocletian in the early 3rd century AD. However, what survives most notably is the Divine Pymander, the Asclepian Dialogues, and the Tabula Smaragdina, which is the Emerald Tablet. So these would seem to indicate a leaning towards alchemy, especially in the way of Hermeticism, which, again, we can't talk about secret societies without mentioning Hermeticism. Hermeticism is tied in with alchemy. Alchemy, as it's tied in by extension in all these secret societies to Kabbalah, or, as it's practiced with the Freemasons. The Masons are crafters. Anyhow, there is also another document, the Leiden Papyrus, that is now in a Dutch museum, that is one of the earliest known cases of what could be considered chemistry. That's something to look into for your own research if you want to. Leiden, Leyden, papyrus. So in this discussion of what is stuff, because this seems to be the inciting question that puts us down the road of alchemy. What is stuff? Which was the preoccupation of the earliest documented, recorded philosophers, the Pre-socratics. So Thales of Miletus believed that the prima materia, the material that was before all things, was water. Axiomenes believed that it was air. Heraclitus said that it was fire. And that's kind of a misnomer, because fire and flux is the ebb and flow, which is, again, a more Hermetic reference. But of course, here comes the most important one for our discussion, Aristotle, saying that the 4 terrestrial elements were co-equally basic, and that there was a 5th substance, which had been mentioned before in history, but is mostly coined here by Aristotle, which is the aforementioned many times in the course, ether. The ether, the quintessence, the 5th element, the prima materia, which has many interpretations, and that word has been used many different ways, adding to the confusion of this conversation. So here's the question. Here is more like the belief, the fundamental leap. The leap is that we know, right, we're placing a bet that there is an achievable prima materia. And that this prima materia, this substance that is the ancestor to all substances, is, for one, again, achievable, believable, and capable of miraculousness, basically, right? Like, to be able to find that, to make it, or to restore it. Because the idea is that it's latent in all substances, in all elements. It's in there. So how can we distill it, provided that it's there, right? And that's the alleged philosopher's stone, which stone isn't a great way to put it, but if it could be had, this thing beyond all things, this thing that unifies all things, what would that mean? And so going off this Aristotelian philosophical system, here we go. And this is where alchemy really takes the shoot, where from the Western end, which we're going to talk about beyond the Western end. So there are many ideas that are really interesting in this matter theory, that the earth kind of fruits these minerals, it grows them, which one of which is gold. It creates it in time, it's a natural budding of the earth, which is pretty beautiful, poetic. So the alchemist would then ask, can we speed this up? If we could make the gestation period shorter, and if metals could be procured through manual means. And so the question here, and this could seem selfish, right, for riches or for whatever, but it is an earnest question. Can it be done? It doesn't have to be greedy to ask that question. And also, it has this subsequent subliminal thing about letting us know what we can and can't do. But this act of working with metals obviously goes back into the Bronze Age, right? And the Greeks were smelting copper in at least 2200 BCE. And so, you had jewelers and you had lapidary work long into the ancient past. This is not solely derivative of alchemy. However, it is the tie with alchemy, right? But like I also mentioned, in whatever acts, making dyes, making certain substances from crushing shells, harvesting certain minerals for uses in making paints. I mean, or discovering that urine could be used as a mordant for clothes to dye them with. These are all just the scientific method, so to speak, messing around and finding out. So this is part of this experimentation, and we as a human society have always been doing it. But as soon as we get this spiritual twang about us messing with things, this specific act of messing with things for the spiritual aim or to achieve the prima materia, that's when we call it alchemy. So in China, there is Cheng Taoling, which is noted as the first Taoist pope, and this is just after AD, said to have been born in 35 AD. And this specific pope, which is such a weird way of putting it, Taoist pope, stepped away from ruling in just about every respect, declined all services to the people, and just studied what we are calling alchemy and meditation and purity. And of course, we can't talk about Taoism without talking about the alleged alchemical works of Lao Tzu, which is this, there have been many supernatural claims given to Lao Tzu, the creator of Taoism, for those that aren't in the know. And there are all these mentions to, on this side of the world, the elixir of life, which in some instances it would seem to grant immortality, but in other instances it is a substance and a hypothesized, a proposed substance that will extend your life and extend your youth, will basically nerf aging. And so it's not too far off from this fountain of youth kind of take that this sort of thing exists. An interesting note here is that the Taoists have a fivefold matter theory. So they have a different matter theory than the Western world. The Western world does have five, kind of, but they are not the exact five of the Taoist and the Eastern alchemy and elemental understanding. But that's not my job to get into just specifically talking about matter theory today. We're talking about the history of this and the ideas. So the practical application of alchemy, more noted in pharmaceutical and works of medicine. And this started with the idea of creating an exterior material. So to mix gold, to mix cinnabar, which is mercury sulfite, to mix jade, to mix it with herbs, to mess with these things. And in the idea that some substances are very yang, masculine, and some substances are very yin. So if you have a body that is full of a lot of yang, naturally you have made it full of a lot of yang energy, then the idea was to throw a heavy yin energy into your body via consumption, and that this would shoot you up. That this would, if you could achieve equilibrium with that other radical, then you would become transmuted. And you had to try it. You had to try it. And of course, in reflection, this seems silly, right? Because you're consuming heavy metals and mercury. I mean, this is how we learned that that's not a good idea. So this was fatal. And for reasons why it was fatal was a matter of speculation at the time. However, some things to note before we move on from the Eastern world in this respect, or specifically from China, is that eventually this Weitan, Waitan, art, was replaced by Naitan, Naitan, finding the inner elixir versus the outer elixir. This happened around the 6th century. So then comes what we recognize as more meditative, more soul mindfulness seeking methods in the religious spiritual world. You know, but from this time of this exterior seeking, and from this time of the movement into interior seeking, we got the art of feng shui. We got the art of Weitan, of Naitan, and most notably, the invention of gunpowder as something of a byproduct from this alchemical seeking. And the implication of that is obviously huge, right? The implication of going through this alchemical journey and discovering gunpowder, look what the West did with it. look what was made out of what was made, you see. Something that started with a spiritual aspiration. So in India, we can see this influence from what can be called Indian alchemy into the Western world via the invasion of Alexander the Great circa 325 BC. So this would already have been an ensuing ideas of the Greek, Egyptian, mix-mash alchemy. Now you're introducing the mix-mash of Indian alchemy, which is coined as Rasayana. R-S-A-Y-N-Y-A-N-A. Rasa meaning nectar, perhaps, meaning juice, meaning mercury. Yana, art, path. Rasa can also mean essence, so this could be a translation meaning the path of essence. This could also be translated into its older form, proto-chemistry, or, its other form, I should say, Rasanastra, or Rasa Astra, Astara, which is the science of mercury. Mercury, mind you, is a substance that is named directly after the deity, the attributes of that deity, Mercury. So that alone is a subject could be a discourse of its own spiritual studies session. But this Rasayana seemed to mostly focus, again, on the restorative attributes, the messing with medicines, pharmaceuticals, drugs, what have you. And things like gold were in the mix. How to give youth back to the aging. And again, this is an attempt to alleviate suffering, right? And this goes back to the shamanic. If you have been following the course this long, then you know that this is a part of the spiritual, religious history of humankind at its most core. How to relieve suffering, how to understand death. This is so strong in the study of alchemy. So they say that this Rasayana began around 1200 BC and extends out into our Vedic medicine, extending lifespan, working with what herbs do what. And still to this day, you still see people slanging, people selling, people buying, authentic herbology from the Eastern world for purposes of medicine. What do you turn to when Western medicine is letting you down? You turn to the East, which is this herbology, which has been formed from the spiritual pursuit that was this alchemy. So, it works itself into lifestyle and dietary and supplemental use. And so it's not so much about seeking this great and elusive idea, very abstract idea of the prima materia. And it's not to say that they weren't seeking some sort of elixir that had some tremendous qualities, but it doesn't quite have that supernatural flair that the prima materia, the philosopher's stone, does. It's a very famous laboratory that was called the Rasashala, which is said to have had documents that, or did have documents that show a procedure that transmutes base metals into gold. So there was this equal traction in India as well, this idea, or this work, or trying your hand at this matter theory. Can this thing be done? And so it could be thought of as, here was something that was proposed across the ancient world that everybody's going to get their hands on, or this could be a natural question that was spontaneously erupting out of the human psyche during this time. And you can't talk about this conversation without talking about the Islamic world and the Islamic Golden Age. The concrescence, the collection of all of these things I've just discussed, what was happening in the Eastern world, what was happening in the Western world, the great works of Galen and Dioscorides, they all coming together in Jabir, or what is translated as Gerber, Geber, when it hits the Western world. Jabir is going to collect all of these different recipes that are going on, and he's going to put them together in the Al-Razi, with Al-Razi, alongside Al-Razi, and alongside, I don't want to get too lost in the names today, but you have over 800 compound recipes, simple and compound recipes in these collections from the Islamic Golden Age. So you have Al-Razi, you have the very mythic Jabir, you have this great collection that's coming out of the Islamic world. And during the 13th to the 16th centuries, Europe was very active in translating these works. And by no means does this exclude all the other things that are going on in the Islamic Golden Age. You have the natural philosophy growing, you have medicine growing, you have all works of astronomy growing, and what are great precursors to science, mathematics. It is a blossom, an absolute boom of the idea of human history. So when it comes to kind of the consolidation and the more concretion of what we call alchemy, it has to be in great thanks to the Islamic Golden Age. And the Crusades show up around, they began in 1096. And this act, much like Alexander the Great with India, is yet again mixing the pool ever more when it comes to what people know mutually about this subject, what things were being worked on by Jabir, and how it's being brought to Europe. Oh. So, let's get back onto the Western world in a certain way. Albertus Magnus, Thomas Aquinas, these names would be very strong in trying to consolidate the inlatent pagan ideas or, pre-Christian ideas and the growing need of Christianity to be validated. So, how to marry the tenets of Christianity with the tenets of alchemy without it turning heretical. And so those are some strong names. How to take what Aristotelian theory was saying and make it Christian. And that was a big task for Albert and Aquinas. And so you have these many characters that pop up, because this is really where the height of alchemy is coming from, is during this time, after 1000 all the way to about 16,000, is where we're seeing the great number of works pop out. Before it's like, is this alchemy? It's playing, is this? But then at this point, this is what we're calling alchemy, within the span of this rough 600 years. Hard-nosed Western alchemy. And Raymond Lully is a big name of this era, and who got ripped off quite a bit, because there are over 480 treatises that are given the name Raymond Lully. So it's been a pseudonym beyond Raymond Lully, it would seem. It almost would make it seem like a meme, because if you didn't want your name attached to something, then it just became, okay, throw it to Raymond Lully, which is, that deserves its own storytelling right there. He had this in his lifetime too. You can see how much Christianity did really involve itself with the alchemical journey, because Raymond became absolutely affixed. Well, first he got his heart broken, and then he turned to religion, and then he became an alchemist, and then he used the rest of his life to travel all over the Islamic world and to basically refute the teachings of Muhammad. So you can see how at this point as well, Christianity is kind of putting a cap on the alchemical journey. Now, I don't want to spend too much time there. My big initiative right now is to give the historical context, and then we're going to talk about the ideas at the cap, okay, at the end. You have in 1350 you have John of Rupiskissa, who is trying to create a substance that prevents decay in the body. And this is, I'm kind of giving you a gag reel here. So he's looking for something that will preserve, right? And everything decays. Metals rust. If you let wine sit out, it turns into vinegar. However, if you can find the water of life, or the burning water, which is one of these great alchemical terms, if you can distill the purity of the essence out of wine and just get its essence, then you'll notice that it's preserving. And this is alcohol. Creates moonshine. And this is the, seeking, right? This is messing around and finding out. And so if you put something in alcohol, it's preserved. Alcohol doesn't go bad if it's pure, right? And so this is truly miraculous, honestly. I mean, we know what moonshine can do to you now. But to think about that you just came up with this thing, that you were betting, and this, you discovered it, right? You came out with it. This, you thought, with the hype of this, ability of the substance, this was called the fifth essence, the quinta essentia, or in other words, the quintessence. The finest, purest, and most concentrated essence of a thing. Moonshine, baby. So thank alchemy for that. Something that preserves sincerely. And think of the, medical, again, that plays into the medical field. The beneficial attributes of alchemy, cleansing wounds and killing bacteria. I mean, that again, in this time, in this context, was miraculous, magical. Who knows what we could do with this thing? And you just don't know. You don't know what you could do with these things. So now comes the era where things start to turn sour. And this was because you have such great things that are coming up, and we'll talk about that later. You have such great things that are being discovered and such notable things that are being done. Humanity is high off of what can be done with the stuff. And now you have people who are attracted to this. It's power. It's power, and power will always corrupt. You start off something with great intentions, and then it just gets too much, and everybody comes in, they ruin it. It's like Woodstock, or endless examples. I don't want to go down there. Anyway, so people would make good money out of claiming they were alchemists, out of claiming that they could do things, and then investors were all too ready to throw them a chunk of change for it, and then they just dip. So then people are like, I don't know about these alchemists anymore, because it seemed that it got overrun with charlatans, which is the easiest, simplest, and quickest way that I can put this era in history. So you do have sincere people who are sincerely on the alchemical journey. And then you have the charlatans, and they're gonna pee in the pool for everybody. And then you have, for instance, England and Christendom forbidding alchemy on the pain of death. Although the Pope, still during this time, who's making it illegal, punished with the pain of death, is still studying alchemy inside the Vatican for means of enriching the church. Because, again, and here's where the greed thing comes in. If you can procure gold, right? Genuinely, people believe you can transmute base metals into gold. That is riches for the church. So, of course, they're going to underhandedly be into it. I secretly want to do a whole spiritual studies session on just these kinds of things about the church. I'd really love doing that. So, even if you were the most sincere alchemist during this time, taking your own road, which here I want to take some time to talk about an idea right now. What is really unique about this is that although Christianity was trying to co-opt alchemy, and we do see several figures that are being co-opted by Christianity. There's another famous alchemist who is obsessed and made his journey all about trying to prevent the suffering of the ensuing apocalypse via alchemy. But in all sincerity, the alchemical journey, regardless of if it was aligned with Taoism, Indian Rasayana, you are alone. And what I mean by this is that this is an undertaking that you take alone. This doesn't have to do with any religion necessarily. This is a quest. Again, I want to bring it back to its initial idea because we can get lost in all this, you know. You want to achieve your soul. You want to know thyself. You want the pearl from the depths. You want to know what's going on, who you are. You want to achieve that. And you want to put honest work into that. And this is a method that holds promise. And that doesn't rule over you. That you can take on the work if you have the conviction. And so the art of making alchemy so arcane and so undecipherable and so riddled with nomenclature and symbolism and very, very occult looking diagrams was an act of only the sincere, only the highest achieved, only those with the most gusto, right? Who are really the thing can get this, can see through all the deciphering, can put in the work to achieve the quintessence or whatever, the lion's blood, whatever. So I really feel like that needs to be known when it comes to anybody's impression on alchemy and this whole historical time. Because now, in our timeline, you, as a seeker, as a genuine seeker, will be put to death if you are found out. So, we go more arcane, more and more arcane, more and more untranslatable. Anyway, there was a case where a group of alleged alchemists, were found out. They attempted to poison the Duchess. This happened in the summer of 1574. And, so they failed. So not only were they trying to poison the queen, or the Duchess, I should say, with alchemical means, but they were also charlatans. They weren't producing what they were being paid to produce alchemically. And so it did not go well for them. And there are many cases of how this worked, but still yet, to say that alchemy is illegal and punishable as it was done to this group, you still have people who are tasked with making medicines. You still have people who are producing jewelry. You still are seeing metallurgists refining metals, people gathering minerals, people running pharmacies, bleaching clothes. All these things are still alchemy. So the interesting question, again, is how the Western world came to define what is alchemy and what isn't alchemy. Because it really is arbitrary, other than to say that there is a spiritual pursuit, ? Anyway, a big figure that comes after this is Paracelsus. And Paracelsus is really one to study if you want to dip your toes into this tradition, because he's coming after all of this and he's reading into all that was before. And he was originally a doctor. He was in the medical field, and he had very unsavory opinions about where the medical field was going. So he travels about, he studies mineralogy, he starts messing around with the minerals, starts messing around with the medicines, and he creates, or what he kind of like procures, I should say, the ars spagyrica. And this is the act of essential oils, of making the spagyric, but that's a whole nother thing to go into. Medical anatomy as it plays into matter theories, which I feel like that's quite the discussion I'd love to have with a doctor. Anyway, so This proposed blend, or going against the Aristotelian method and trying to create a whole new method, which is what we now recognize in the alchemical story as the trifecta, the tria prima, which is salt, sulfur, and mercury. But that is a late addition to the alchemical story. Again, it was for the longest time the Aristotelian fivefold elemental matter theory. You have Paracelsus here changing the story, very notably, not disreputably at all. So here comes the push, again, a kind of reinvigoration, so to speak, of the alchemical journey, of seeking the elixir of immortality, that it's out there, still. And the scientific elite of the Enlightenment had a lot of interest in this. This is not yet done away with. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, is going to try to bring back up this question. So there have been many claims about what's been done during this time. The product that is called the lion's blood, that accelerates the growth of all biological things. Tinctures made with gold that claim to be the philosopher's stone. Very wily claims of what these things can do, because again, selling the supernatural potential of these things. Sensationalism could be good for certain aims. Now, I want to talk about another kind of gag reel of this whole thing, which is Hennig Brandt. And in 1669, he is messing around in the alchemical way with what is referred to as the golden stream as an ingredient. Now, the golden stream is urine. That is the alchemical nomenclature. So this is what I want to point out here too. You're messing with matter theory, man, right? Anything's on the table. The original magic and witchcraft of the world, which witchcraft is a very ham-fisted term here, but the original magic, as we can trace the idea back into religious and spiritual history, was with bodily secretions, and natural herbology. These things were used in ceremony and in, again, magical aspirations. So while this might seem silly to use urine in this end, is really a kind of modern take on it. Because urine, semen, blood, mucus, all manner of the secretions of the body are fair game in the magical tradition. And they all symbolize something. So he's thinking that this is going to procure the philosopher's stone, of course. That's always the dragon that you're chasing, right? Puts it to heat, boils it, sends out the fumes, and eventually he creates phosphorus, discovers phosphorus, which phosphorus, by the way, is a nod to a Greek god, Phosphoros, whole nother thing. But we can thank this act of having phosphorus in the modern day and the scientific community to urine and the seeking of the alchemical stone. Medicines, pigments, alloys, cosmetics, all manner of cosmetics, perfumes. The alchemical journey. The techniques, the use of scientific instruments, flasks, couples, funnels, all for the alchemical dream. Antimony, arsenic, zinc. All of these things genuinely discovered outside of the charlatanism, outside of all the alleged superstition. not only, right, and we have a whole nother era of this that I'm not going to go over a lot, but I want to say that materially speaking, this pursuit has great results, and we wouldn't have the modern day amenities and understandings of matter without this spiritual pursuit. There came a distinct point where this pursuit took a flip, right? Because you have where chemistry splits off and where alchemy has to split off. So this is a classic fractalization of an idea, which happens in every religion, right? There's always subsequent denominations. So chemistry goes down the road of just matter, what's called modern science, materialism. And alchemy, if still, right, like in a form, goes full spiritual. And so that's where our modern definition and association with the word is from how this split. Because before, they were truly in on the same bag, right? Materialism and spirituality. But with this split of what we call chemistry, just get rid of the get rid of the, the part of the the root. So chemistry is just black magic. So the alchemists in this time interpret what are becoming the chemists as those that have lost the goal. They're going about the thing, but they have no grasp of what it's all about, of what the essence is, of what the seeking is. That is the inner journey that we've been talking about. Discovery, transmutation of self, embodying the outside from the inside, creation, recreation. And also, this idea of achieving the Philosopher's Stone, I haven't mentioned this. You are doing recreation. Creation came from the prima materia. It was the waters of noon. It was the amniotic fluid of the pre-cosmos. It was the creation. So you achieving it would be recreation, becoming whole again, which that's what this is all about. Becoming whole. And somehow it spits out matter. It somehow spit out chemistry. But you still have Hermeticism. You still have the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. You still have the Freemasons who took this spiritual end from it and kept running with it. And you have had the kind of infrequent alchemists come out and at certain times have been accepted or at least heard by the scientific community. A good example of that is the Cyprian Theodore Tifero, who had an observation of metallic transmutation, but was not replicable in Paris as it was done in Mexico. So there have been some interesting cases in the mix here. But before I go on, let's talk about the discoveries. Metalworking, refining, production of gunpowder, production of glass, ceramics, inks, dyes, cosmetics as listed before, extracts, liquors, and dyes, all manner of other subsequent dyes outward from what was known in the ancient world. The periodic table, in large margin, alchemical investigation. Ores, inorganic acids, bases, compounds. Sulfuric acid, first described in 1300 by Pseudo-Geber, or Gerber as it was. Very common tool in modern industry. In the 1500s to the 1600s, you had ammonium sulfate, hydrochloric acid, tin tetrachlorinate, all from Andreas Libravius. Along with him and Pseudo-Gerber, there's also the aqua regia, the royal water, or in other words, the admixture of hydrochloric acid and nitric acid, which is the alkahest, that which dissolves gold, which was a great discovery. That was the goal. So I want to talk about this before I mention the rest. The alkahest was this thing that was believed that could be created that would dissolve everything down to its essential, down to its essence. And again, essence is spirit. Essence is the thing of itself. Essence is the real thing. And all this impurity is nonsense by this frame of thinking, right? So to discover the alkahest, that which dissolves you down, I mean, what do you think that would do to you, right? I mean, what's the end game here? You dissolve yourself down and then you're just pure soul, liberated from the body? Or is it to say that you could dissolve the fundamental corruptness of the universe itself? By inciting the prima materia into this world, it could wave off all the impurity as this kind of, again, it's a deus ex machina. It's a oh God, there's a word for this in literature. You know, the end all be all, the thing that could magically solve everything. Anyway, again, mention gunpowder, arsenic, as it was allegedly discovered by our boy Albertus Magnus, but probably was known much sooner than that. All manner of metallurgy, all manner of high-quality carbon steel that we're into, the alchemist journey, and something really worthy of mentioning is Isaac Newton's personal investigation into alchemy, which that was perfect for the time. You couldn't get into the question. We have become so specialized in our way of thinking about the world, right? You are just a physicist. You are just a botanist. You are just a basketball player, whatever, right? But we've lost this gentleman knowledge, blah, blah, that was before. This true Montessori way of approaching knowledge that was the past. And that is to say that you cannot study something without studying everything. How can we talk about physics if we don't talk about what matter is? How can we talk about physics without doing math and without also questioning how it applies in the world? You know, there's endless ways to fan it out. So, of course, Newton is into alchemy because Newton is trying to study objects, matter itself, trying to understand how it works. And to understand how it works, you have to ask, what is it? So then you have to come up with certain assumptions about what it is. And of course, this isn't something to be brought up when teaching the history of science, because that would have to introduce the natural philosophical questions that come into the mix. Because for Newton to put forward laws of motion, for him to put forward universal gravitation, there are certain assumptions that are made about the metaphysical reality of physics itself and of matter. But Newton's not interested in bifurcating what he did and didn't study, you know? He's on the path, like the alchemists were. He's on the path to figure out what's going on. What is this? But scientists, that's a different, losing the way by virtue of what Newton was into. Anyhow, you still see references as it came into the 19th century sparsely, especially with esotericism, and there are mentions of what Carl Jung's commentary on this subject are. I want to talk about a few things as a closer to this. So this is the history of the idea. Now, this seeking of perfection is an idea that we've been investigating as a species for a while. Now, this has done us very wrong in certain ways. And what I mean by this is, here is the bet, The bet is that there is a perfected state, or that there is a greater form of a person. Which, of course, if there is that, then you usually want to throw your boys into the mix, right? Not to say that I'm just better than everybody, that I've achieved a higher transmutation, but also my boys are in on this, and that is tribalism, which this seeking of perfection to become greater or holier than thou or more pure, yada yada, has naturally, in a way, became what was eugenics in the late 18th and early 19th. Because that is the belief that there are superior people, which played into all manner of xenophobia and racism. And I'm not saying that alchemy is guilty of that. I'm saying this is what I want us to look at, the history of ideas. The idea is that we can become this perfection. And that's the bet. That's the assumption. And look what we did with it. Look what we did with that. Now, in earnestness, that is not to throw shade on the earnest alchemist, because the earnest alchemist was not in on it with the boys. The earnest alchemist was seeking. And this isn't selfish in this way, right? If we get in on a spiritual religious community, that's when we can talk about altruism or power plays or blah, 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 right? But if you're just trying to learn who and what you are by actually investigating it, it's like when a yogi goes their own way in their own meditation and stops following a tradition. They're choosing to that they care enough, that they have the passion enough to answer the question for themselves. And by that seeking of yourself for yourself, that is beneficial to everybody in miraculous ways. Like I said, all these things that were discovered in very strange methods, mind you, are of the benefit of humankind at this point, in our understanding of the world, furthering our understanding of the world. And this came from someone like you or me earnestly going their own way to find out. And so the alchemical journey is certainly not having to boil and do tinctures and mess around with herbs. It very much can, and it very much lends itself to that. But in truth, and as it's been, the definition has changed in time, it's about you and you changing yourself. And you transmuting, you improving. But as my criticism before, the danger here was always when this idea of improvement has turned into classism, elitism, holier than thou-ism. That is the trap of this seeking, if you have the wrong intentions. And that is why, in part, the alchemists have been so arcane, hidden in their methods, hidden in what they share with each other, hidden in how you create certain things, because to put the power in the wrong hands has these dastardly consequences, as it was, as I've illustrated. So, there's so much more I'd like to talk about here. This is an intro to the subject. I should have started with that. This is, you have the field, the ideas are there, and any further minutia is going to be much more accessible. So think about this as a part one. I don't know when I'll get back to this, but I hope this has made you feel that you have a context for when in investigating this subject in the future, or when this subject ever will arise in your world.